Welcome back, and the first of the careers panels that we're holding during the next 2 days of the CentreCourt MBA Festival. These careers panels have been one of the revelations of the last year, reaching out to schools for perspectives on a job market, which of course, when we held CentreCourt just over 12 months ago, was looking fairly gloomy. But even then, I think there was this compelling message from all of the schools of the sort of skill sets, the adaptability that graduates were emerging with onto a job market. So today, of course, is the chance to find out where we are 12 months on. As President Biden has said that there's no more need for face masks, and in the UK, the pubs and restaurants are open again. That makes me wonder if there will be any work that people want to do with all of those distractions. And I'm joined by Zoe McLaughlin, who is the Head of Employment Engagement at the London Business School. It's lovely to have you back with us, Zoe. Spencer Hamilton. Spencer is the Global MBA Head of Careers and Corporate Services at EDHEC, and you can see that beautiful Nice campus in bright sunshine behind Spencer. Chris was complaining that it was a little bit colder and gloomier up in Manchester, but it's only a passing cloud. Chris is the Head of Postgraduate Career Services at the Alliance Manchester Business School, and coming in through that radio antenna that you can see in the Berlin background, it's lovely to see an old friend, Marcel Callis, the Head of Career Services at ESMT Berlin. So thank you all four of you for joining us for the next hour. And Zoe, as we reflect on what the last 12 months are like, I guess you've been working hard with the graduating class of this summer, the class of 2021. What are you seeing? A much more positive picture?
Yeah, so I think I did this careers panel right back when this all kicked off, something similar, and the message then was perhaps a little bit gloomier. We definitely saw some impact as we went into the summer and into graduation last year, especially with industries which were traditionally tied to being client-facing or had a lot of travel. So industries like consulting, we found were quite hard hit initially. And obviously there were some other industries that were just in trouble once the pandemic got underway. But what we've really seen in the last few months is just a buoyancy, a return, and if not even just a return, but actually an improvement, I think, on the job market as it was even before the pandemic. So we are really seeing, the consulting industry has picked up, has come back very optimistically with high targets for recruitment. The tech industry, which was just going from strength to strength through the pandemic, has kind of really hit its groove. I think we've also seen sort of an interesting rise in remote opportunities. So talent is now not just tied to the city in which they want to work, they can actually sort of diversify their options. So we're seeing students doing things that perhaps more far-flung than they might have had the opportunity to do pre-pandemic. So we're pretty optimistic as we're going into graduation, into summer, that our students are well placed. And I think that's only going to get better as we sort of recover, if you like, from the last 18 months. So yeah, a positive picture, I think, in London, certainly.
I was reading last week, some official who is, I guess, paid to measure these things, he said it's actually the shortest recession since the mid-19th century, and claimed it was just the month of April, and then things started to pick up. Of course, there's been a much greater social impact than that. I mean, have you seen, Zoe, that some employers that were hesitant have, things have picked up perhaps quicker than people expected, and now there's this rush for talent again?
Yeah, because I think a lot of what caused the slowdown was uncertainty more than anything else. I think there was just hesitancy to take on too much talent that they weren't sure they were going to be able to utilise. And certainly with the consulting industry, that was definitely the case. They just weren't sure what the project pipeline would look like. They don't want to damage their brands with their business school partners by hiring students they can't then usefully employ. So I think it was hesitancy more than anything else. So I think the rebound has been able to be quick because as things have opened up and as we have a roadmap, then companies are able to kind of get back to normal a lot quicker. I don't think it has been necessarily been driven by economic crisis. I think it's just been driven by uncertainty. And as that uncertainty clears, we have just a much more buoyant job market. That certainly seems to be the impression we're getting from the recruiters we work with.
Right. Spencer, beyond that Nice campus, of course, EDHEC also has a footprint in Paris, in Lille. You have a campus in London in the middle of the financial markets. So the mobility that Zoe is describing, is that something that you think has really been embraced in terms of how far and wide EDHEC graduates are looking for their next career opportunities?
I think that's a really good point, and you know, the remote working has obviously been an important part of it, but in a way that's just been a staging post. So I think MBAs have found themselves perhaps taken on for a remote working role, but as things start to open up again, we're seeing MBAs suddenly now moving closer to where the work is coming from. So, for example, I had somebody from one of our Pakistani students the other day contacting me to say that he was now very happily working in Warsaw, which is perhaps a surprising destination. But I think we're seeing a lot of students from outside Europe who are finding their first roles now within Europe, starting working remotely, but they're now starting to move towards where the companies are employing them as well. So outside of Europe, there is also some interesting things happening over in the US. We've had quite a few students who've gone over there, as well as Asia as well. My feeling at the beginning of the pandemic was almost that things were sweeping through from east to west, and my impression was that perhaps we would see more of our students moving east as the pandemic started to clear through there. Actually, I was probably wrong. It looks like things are still kind of flaring up here and there, and that sort of geographical wave is no longer the case. But we're certainly seeing students going to a variety of different destinations around the world, and I don't think that what's happened in the past 12 months or so has dampened that down at all.
Right, and any industries in particular, you know, as you think about supply chain, finance, healthcare, no doubt, but that you think have been particularly robust?
I think healthcare has been really important. I think I totally agree with what Zoe was saying about consulting as well, that companies did put the brake on. We were all very concerned about, you know, when work was going to start again. But I would look less at industries and think more about functions. For me, it's been interesting to see the functions which have become more important. So transformation has clearly been really important. Companies which are starting to pivot to serve their customers differently. Maybe they're serving perhaps different kinds of products, different kinds of services than they were a year ago. Companies which are starting to look at selling direct to the customer in ways they hadn't been before. So for me, it's that kind of pivoting and that kind of transformation that's been happening that's probably had more of an effect on where our students are going rather than, you know, what's happening within the sectors themselves.
Right. Presumably, Chris, anybody that was hoping for a career working with the Super League and JP Morgan, that was a fairly short-lived venture. But there are many other opportunities beyond the industry of football. What have you been seeing from Alliance Manchester graduates?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know what to add to what Zoe and Spencer said, because that was a very comprehensive summary of where we are at the moment. I think that point particularly that I'd build on from Zoe around uncertainty, we really saw that very early on. Nobody'd faced this before, right? So nobody knew how to react or what the next steps were and what was going to, and everything kind of just slowed down and locked up at that point. But also the point there that Spencer's made, and I think they both touched on consulting and tech. I think the interesting thing what Spencer's talked about there was around functions. And when we talk about tech, we often, you know, the mental image is probably Google, it's Amazon, but tech is everywhere, right? And actually everybody you talk to, quite everybody you talk to, but the vast majority of organizations you talk to are wanting to have a conversation with you about digitization and about how they move. And it's that sense of probably themes that were already happening, being accelerated over the past 12 months. And I think that's probably what we've noticed the most, or I've noticed the most personally, is that it hasn't massively changed the direction we were going in. It's just we seem to be going there a lot faster now.
Right, and the way that recruiters are recruiting and the way that you're preparing your graduates for that job market, you know, they're all suddenly using virtual platforms to interview, you know, versus any face-to-face meetings. Do you think that's something to stay and something that your MBA graduates will ultimately be able to take advantage of?
I absolutely think it will stay. Again, I think that was something that was already happening. And you notice a lot of different video platforms available now, and that was already, there was already a theme that was coming to fruition. I think actually what's been a really interesting challenge, and I've seen this both in terms of our students and in terms of colleagues, is not so much the process of getting the job, but of starting the job. And that's a different kind of challenge for somebody. If it's an internship in particular, but also if it's a full-time role, the adjustment, the ability to adapt to those circumstances, that's been a challenge, not insurmountable challenge, and it's something we've had to work on, had to think about. And obviously, one of the things that a lot of our students will secure a job through an internship, and you've already got a very limited amount of time to make that really positive impression. And what our recruiters often say is that the people who get the offers at the end of those who've delivered the project, but they've also built the network internally. And that's obviously much more complicated now. But we did a bit of work around it, and you kind of work with the students as you go through the summer period and they started the roles, and they seemed able to adapt. And of course, everybody else has adapted as well. And it's probably been I think if you'd have asked me 2 years ago, how would we all face this? I think I would have been filled with dread, and it certainly was 12 months ago or 15 months ago. But the adaptation is actually, and maybe working with MBAs is part of this, but the adaptation has been pretty strong, really. But that is complicated, you know, starting an internship and trying to convince that employer to hire you afterwards without actually being physically in the premises is a challenge. But I'm glad to say that most of our students seem to have met that challenge.
Right. Now the T of ESMT is technology, and at about 10 o'clock this morning, the DAX reached a record level. So it's almost crisis, Marcel. Well, what crisis? Germany certainly seems to be bouncing back. Are you seeing sort of sectorial, you know, is that tech driven or certain sectors, or is it functions as Spencer was describing?
You mean the areas where we are consistent, or
you're seeing real demand?
Yeah, it was maybe to put it in a little bit of a bigger perspective. I mean, I can relate to all the stories of my colleagues, what happened also with us. We are a little bit on a different cycle at ESMT, because we have a 1-year MBA program starting in January, and the class graduated in December 2019, and then 2 months later, right, they were the first. So that had an effect, because people who were interviewing, the interviews stopped, processes were postponed to later in the year. It picked up, luckily, but you know, between March and the summer, it was a total silence. We were holding our breath, because our mastery management students, however, they were all supposed to start. We had 120 people starting an internship the 1st of April 2020. And we thought, oh my goodness, how is this going to work? But it was amazing. Everyone started just virtually. There were some exceptions where internships were cancelled or also postponed, but in the end, it worked, right? People worked virtually, they worked from their home, and yeah, they all managed to finish a successful internship, you know, even with some full-time jobs after it. Yeah, I mean, I would say the technology sector is not so affected. We see many people going in there. We are also a little bit of a different school. Maybe we have a small cohort on purpose. You know, we have between 50 and 70 students per year in the MBA program. And it's extremely diverse where people end up. And it's funny, because the majority stays in Germany by far. You know, it's over 90% stays in Germany. And the majority of that part also stays in Berlin, because Germany is also super friendly with visa and that kind of stuff. And yeah, we see, and Berlin is startup hub, technology center. many people end up in e-commerce and technology roles. So yeah, it is. I'm not saying that it was super easy. It's a challenge. Networking without being able, to meet people in person. You have to do everything online, and that's not for everyone. But on the other hand, it's what to do, right? You almost have no choice.
Right.
You need to adapt it, and life goes on, as I say. And hopefully this pandemic is over at some point. We are making progress, but the world looks different forever.
Well, we're only 15 minutes into the panel, and we've already become very philosophical. I mean, you've talked about, for example, the challenges, Chris, of networking for internship opportunities, making that quick impression. Zoe, you spoke to the uncertainty, that particularly that everyone was faced with perhaps a year ago. So, as you think about your LBS graduates in uncertain, difficult markets, why do you think they're better off with an MBA? Not just with the skill sets perhaps that come with it. They can do discounted cash flow, fine, but what are the other skills that you've observed in the graduates that you think have served them so well?
Yeah, I mean, I think a key thing about the MBA is thinking time and getting to know yourself, getting to really explore what you're good at, what your strengths are. I think there used to be a belief that people should try and sort of fix their weaknesses, and now we understand that people are so much better in careers that play to their strengths. And Spencer and I were talking about this panel about being sort of able to identify the thing that you are good at and that you enjoy, that you can hang a career around. And it might be over a myriad of industries and a myriad of companies, but there is that kind of red thread that runs through of the thing that you're good at. And I think sometimes it can be very hard when you're working or studying outside an MBA to really think about those career skills, what you're good at, what you can be good at, what you want to do. And an MBA gives you both space to do that, but also support to do that. So there is a career curriculum built around helping tease out those strengths and those kind of preferences. So I think, doing an MBA means you know yourself, but it also means that when you join a company, you've been through that process and are therefore ready to kind of really commit to being the best you can be at that role. So I think that's a critical thing. I think although, we wouldn't wish the last year on anyone, what I have really seen in our students is just this growth in resilience. And I think that has been really supported through the MBA, through the networks, through the sort of the whole experience. It's really helped them grow. It's been a relatively safe space, although I'm sure it hasn't always felt safe, for them to really sort of ride through what happens when a global pandemic, hits the world. And I think they would say that they've come out stronger, more resilient. Those skills that employers always say they want, comfort with ambiguity, empathy, all of those things have been it's been a real learning ground for our students. And I think beyond the skills, as I will always say, is it's the network. You are buying into a network for life. And I think all of us here would agree, it's not just about the first job post-graduation, it's about every career pivot you're going to make for the rest of your life. And that is where the real value of the MBA, I think, just comes into its own, because that network is something that will stay with you for the rest of your career. And it's just invaluable. And in good times or in bad, having a network of fantastic MBA peers and colleagues is always going to set you in good stead. So yeah, I mean, I'm, as you would imagine, I'm 200% behind the idea that an MBA is always a good decision.
Right. And that conversation that Zoe was describing, Spencer, sort of holding up that mirror and digging deep. What are you really good at? So whether this year it's healthcare, supply chain, and technology, and perhaps 3 years from now other emerging sectors or returning sectors, is that something that you really try to impress upon graduates, that yes, they'll be the first job after the MBA, but how you're assisting them and setting them up for the rest of their career?
It is, and I would pick up on a lot of the things that Zoe said, and even your point there. I think one of the things that is sometimes difficult for MBAs to understand is when I'm saying, well, I think that'd be terrific if you could do this for 2 or 3 years and then you can move on to something else. 2 or 3 years for me, I know is not a long time. If you're speaking to someone who's somewhere between 25 and 30 years old, it's 10% of their life, and they look at me and wonder why I think that 2 or 3 years is nothing, when for them it's such a huge, it seems to be such a huge part of their life. But it's important to try to get them to understand that next step is not going to define them for the rest of their lives, but it will be an important next step to take. And then, I suppose the challenging question which we try to ask is, what is it that's special about you? And really get them to try to think about it. The first time you ask that question, very often students will come back and they say, oh, I'm very hardworking and I'm very adaptable and I was very successful in what I did before. And then you point out that, every one of their colleagues who comes in to meet you says exactly the same thing. That's not really what makes you special. Is to try to help them to really go back in and understand what it is about them that is different, that is special, and then take that combination of things they have, which may include speaking Icelandic, or it may include something which for them seems to be totally normal, and then look for where are there opportunities likely to be for someone who has that combination of things. So that's really what we're trying to do, is get them to think very carefully about the things that are unique somehow about them, or the combination of things about them which are unique.
How does that work, Chris? Because the journey that Spencer is describing, that the partnership that you have with these students, they've applied to Alliance Manchester and perhaps shared what they thought their post-MBA career goals might be, initial thoughts, and then over the next 18 months, for many those ideas will change. They'll spend an incredible period with a very diverse, talented bunch of classmates and head in different directions. So how do you help them on that journey of exploring different opportunities and skill sets that they have?
God, that's a very big question now. I think whenever I talk to, so how I'd answer that actually is when we first meet a new class and a new group of students, and if there's any prospective MBS students on this call or listening, they must not reveal the answer to this next question. I always ask them to put themselves in one of three groups. That either they know exactly what they want to do post MBA, they have a few ideas they want to explore, or they have no idea whatsoever. And I'm actually pretty relaxed about where they are. I probably get most concerned about the people who know exactly what they want to do post MBA, because before you've met somebody from the career service, before you've met faculty, before you've met a classmate, before you've met any alumni, I feel like I go back to, there's a quote from one of our graduates years ago, said that one of the team asked him what advice he would give to himself at the start of the program, and he thought for a moment and then said, very profound, don't let your goals limit your opportunities. And it's that kind of sense of having peripheral vision when you're doing an MBA, and it's really, actually, I find, I worked as obviously the head of the service, but I worked as a careers advisor in the team for a long time, and it's one of the hardest things to do is to get to challenge people and to get them to challenge their own thinking a little bit. We on the full-time MBA, we cover the whole of our postgraduate, but particularly on the full-time MBA, we really work really hard to get to know the students. We have a bigger program than Marcel, but smaller than others. There's around about 100, 110 on our program, and a reasonably sized careers team. So we get to know them very well. And it's actually that point that's most important. And you can't always, sometimes it's a case of if somebody's absolutely set that it's investment banking or there's no point in doing an MBA, sometimes you have to let them go through that process a little bit and then reflect and think about what's happened and what's worked and what's not worked and what other things are coming through. And for me, I think it's about building that relationship with the individual students, getting to understand them yourselves a little bit, but also getting them to challenge themselves. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing as a careers advisor. It's not an easy thing as an MBA student. You've got so much riding on this decision that you've made, and you're very fixated on it being a particular thing. So to challenge them on that isn't easy. And I think it comes down to the relationship, and we have unlimited one-to-one support, and we spend the vast majority of our time, our working time, with students. And it's that relationship, I think, that's really key to understanding the student and understanding what it is that's driving them and motivating them that can get you to challenge their thinking a little bit.
I mean, you all have no doubt wonderful finance professors, strategy professors, marketing, accounting, the gamut of the curriculums that you offer. But I get the sense that you guys are the magic source, because that very personal attention that you provide them. I mean, Marcel, you were describing with 50 to 70 MBA students, that's a small group, and each perhaps with their own personal path and hopes and dreams. So what Chris is describing, you must have a lot of face time, even if it's been through Zoom in the last year, to really help them to explore these ideas. How does it work at the SMT?
I'm glad that you mentioned it. We are important next to our fantastic professors, by the way. And the finance professors are the most popular. No, sure. So we try to have fixed moments over the year where the career services team people catch up with the students. Besides that, we work with external professional career coaches. Those are freelancers. And each and every student, you will get 5 coaching sessions over the whole year, over the 10 months available. So 90 minutes, which is basically meant as a support to find out, why are you doing this MBA? What are you good at? What do you like? What do you want to do in life? I myself, I'm very much in favor of, getting people in that direction. Do something what you like to do and what you love to do, that makes you happy, that gets you out of bed, instead of maybe having this social pressure from family, friends, or to enter this high-end consulting firm where you basically not feel home. So yes, and that's I haven't seen the whole class, this year's MBA class, in person at all, in one room. I know them from Zoom, and sometimes when I go to the office one day a week, we see each other in the hallway, but that's basically it. So yes, a lot of personal attention, a lot, helping the people to give it a start as well. And it's a challenge because the first, and I guess it's the same at other schools, the first 5-6 months of the academic program is insane, intense. So you also need to find a way, to do the things that we tell them to do, to network, to reach out to people, to think and to reflect and look back and look forward, make a plan, reach out to people. They all have to do that, right? Next or in between all those exams and assignments. And that is what I notice in these circumstances, a bigger challenge than when people are on campus, right? You miss the hallway talk, you miss the coffee machine talk, you miss the simple having a walk in the garden talk. It's all arranged, right? On certain times, and that is a little bit of the downside. But yeah, a lot of personal attention, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And as Zoe, you sort of contrast, I don't know if that you see a big difference between the MBA students and their younger pre-experience masters in management students, but the panels talked about sort of shifting someone perhaps out of their comfort zone, to really challenge their goals and where they're headed. So with everything else going on, the intensity that Marcel is describing, do they come to you, or are you sort of working with them? How do you make sure that you're sort of keeping them on this track of self-reflection and moving forward? Does the internship help to then structure the work that you're doing?
Yeah, and I think this is where the Career Centre has the luxury in a way, because I think business school is like a fire hose. You join and it's just in your face, and it's really, really hard, I think, in those first few weeks and months to just be like, oh my goodness, what do I want to get from this experience? And I think it's not just the program, it's meeting everyone, it's the city, once everyone's back on campus, the cities they're in, and wanting to kind of make the most of that experience as well. It's a lot. But I think, and I'm sure my colleagues are similar, we are very careful about curating the careers offer to be timely, to be what students need when they need it. Because often students will come day one and be like, I need to know everything about every industry, I need you to look at my CV, and I need to be interview ready. and we're a bit like, okay, let's take this step by step. So we have this very curated curriculum, which is very much about exploration in the beginning, helping students to really understand what's available, what different sectors look like, what different functions look like, you know, just what the jobs are, because our students come with a vast array of knowledge. Some are very, very well networked in the business world. Some have come from a completely non-traditional sector or have been entrepreneurs. So we give them time to sort of explore what's out there and to really get an understanding of what it takes to get a career in a certain sector or a certain function. And I think for some students, there are things they'll self-select out of. There are some things they'll realize that perhaps they don't quite have the right profile for. Even with an MBA, it's not going to be as realistic for them. And then once they've managed to kind of get that self-exploration done and have their story, we then sort of put in different building blocks of career success. So at that stage, we might move to the application documents where we'll really do a deep dive on the CV and how you pitch yourself and how you network. So it sort of builds incrementally. So we're always very open with students at the beginning that they should trust us and that we will deliver what they need when they need it. And so they can kind of almost sit back a little bit. I mean, I say relax, I'm hesitant to say that because of course you can never relax on your career journey, but they can sort of trust that we will lead them through a curriculum of support that will mean that they are ready for recruitment when it comes around the corner. And I think beyond that, it comes down to individual preference. We have students that come and see us on a daily basis. Coaching is something that our students might take a lot of advantage of. Other students we don't see very often, but often when we speak to them after graduation, they say they wish they'd made more of the coaching, because there really is a gift, I think, in having that ability to sit down one-to-one with a sector expert or a career expert who is focused just on you. I mean, when do you get that in your life? Someone who's genuinely committed to your success, genuinely interested in where you've been and where you're trying to go, and is kind of willing to sort of cheerlead for you and help you. I think, you know, I think it's a loss if students don't make the most of it, but luckily for us, most of our students do. But I think, you know, we curate, and then it's down to students to select as well how much or how little they want to have to do with Career Centre.
Yeah, well, as I said, I have you all down as the magic source of the program. Perhaps this is sort of the trailer that will get the next generation, you know, to really, as you say, it's this wonderful partnership of trust. Zoe had also talked, Spencer, about the power of a network that will serve in the 5, 10, 20 years and the next steps of your career. But is a network of EDHEC graduates that themselves are working across different industries something that they can then tap into and leverage, or sort of have, you know, presentations on the finance industry or different sectors to get to better understand the opportunities out there?
It's interesting you talk about the network. You know, the we are part of a business school which is renowned for its finance. The school is a kind of a powerhouse in that, and our MBA is really a small part. If you look at EDHEC as a whole, our whatever it is, 70 or 80 students that do the MBA is a very small part of a much bigger school. And so one of the things that we do want to do is to make sure that our MBA students are well connected with this much wider EDHEC network. And I would say the alumni are probably our greatest supporters. And it seems to me that, you know, in many ways, the appreciation probably deepens over time. I remember, you know, when I did my MBA a long time ago now, one of the things that came to mind was having finished it, and then 6 months went by, and then 12 months went by. I realized it was a bit like having been in a microwave. You know, you're in this really intense moment where there are so many things going on. And then any good cookbook will tell you when you take something out of the microwave, it's not cooked yet. You have to leave it on one side before it kind of finally reaches the optimum temperature or whatever it may be. And I think an MBA is a bit like that. When you come out of the doors on the last day, you're not ready at all. There's a time which you have to wait for before the thing kind of really settles in. And so I think the appreciation that our students have seems to deepen over time. And we're able to engage them a lot. We engage them during the year on our careers program. They do mock interviews, they take part in panel events, they host visits, they may run webinars and so on. So we try to get our students engaged with the alumni as much as possible, mentoring programs as well. But it's also really important to get them to see beyond just the people who've done the same course and gone before them, to get them to understand that actually the alumni network is much wider than that. And once they start to branch out into those other parts of EDHEC, if you like, then the opportunities and the connections are all the richer.
Thank you for your microwave metaphor. I shall use that with my 8-year-old daughter, who, of course, whenever we bake a cake together, she's eager to eat it as soon as it comes out.
I'm sure when you say the careers guy at EDHEC said this will work, she'll be absolutely believing.
Well, certainly your students in the network, the alumni are listening to you, so why not June Rainbow? For Chris, we'd said earlier about some of the skill sets and paid homage to the finance professors. You know, there are lots of hard skills that are part of the MBA curriculum. As you reflect on, or even as students have come back to you and reflected on some of the soft skills, now, whether it's networking in this virtual environment, you know, how to best interview and, you know, capture personality in a situation like that. What really stands out, do you think, or think of the soft skills that really have impact when you share them with your students?
Yeah, I mean, there's a very good point and a very good question, because I think I'm sure panelists will concur. Whenever you talk to recruiters, that's the feedback that you get. That's the kind of the hardest thing to track down, is often the you know, the teamwork or leadership and the soft skills, I think, are really very, very important, and can differentiate you. It's harder to articulate that over a cover letter and a CV, and that's again goes to the power of the network and getting yourself visible, because it's much more difficult to articulate that. But I think if I narrowed it down to one thing, and I'll come back if I can, what I've noticed over the years, and it was actually a colleague at the business school who I noticed who'd done our MBA a few years ago, and she came back to work at the school, and we talked about it a little bit, and she thinks differently to anybody I've ever worked directly with. She has a different way of looking at things, and I think it's partially the individual that we're talking about, but it's also the MBA. And I think if you do the MBA, you engage with the MBA properly. To Spencer's point earlier there, that actually I suppose if you continue that analogy, if you leave the cake too long, then, you know, it's not edible, right? If you don't make use of it, it's not edible. And there are some parts of I think the analogy is going to die a little bit on me now, but there are some parts of the MBA that you will lose because you won't use them on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. And so you have to think about the network that's always referred to as absolutely something that sticks. But so I think is that way of looking at a problem, or that way of looking at an opportunity, which if you've engaged with the MBA and you've engaged with the process, that's the transformational impact it has. It changes the way that you approach things, it changes the way you look at things, and it's very, very powerful in that respect. And I think coming then to the point in terms of, you know, what we do, and I'm sure others do, is we you know, there's a group of 30 to 40 different nationalities, and before they even start the program, they're working on a project with a client. Like the week before, they're working on a project with a client, with a group of people from literally all over the world. And again, to Zoe's earlier point, everybody's smart. I think actually was your point, Matt. Everybody's smart, everybody's capable, everybody's been a leader before, everybody wants to be the leader in that team, and you have to kind of go through that process of understanding your strengths and where those strengths are most important, and when to take a step back. And that concept of it's not a completely safe environment, because, you know, you're working with live clients and you're working with classmates, and you want to make an impact and you want to make it work, but it's much safer than obviously in a paid employment environment, and you can make mistakes and you can learn from that. And I think it's quite a hard thing to evidence, but I think that's what happens. I think people get thrown into this situation and they're just bombarded with information and bombarded with work. They're working on projects, they're working in multicultural teams, and they have to find a way through, and it transforms them, and it changes the way that they approach things. And I think that's the thing that for me, along with the network, is what sticks for the long term.
Right. Marcel, I'd like to think that you do start every day with a smile on your face and love the work that you do. You gave the example earlier, whether it's through social pressure, this sort of aspiration to work at a McKinsey, Bain or BCG that actually might not be the right destination for you. So As you reflect on the work that you've done with the SMT students over many years, to what extent do you then push back? You know, if you saw someone that had their heart set on the private equity industry or some industry, and you truly felt that wouldn't be where they're the most fulfilled, how far can you go in either showing them other opportunities or sort of you know, taking them through what might be a hard fall?
Well, in the ideal world, they found out themselves, right? And they come to that conclusion. So then I would really encourage to get those conversations with people in the industry you fancy, which might not become reality in the end. Because I mean, I believe strongly in people making their own decisions, right? And come to the conclusion based on something which is tangible. And it's, yeah, you know, and then networking comes again in place to look out for the people working in that industry you think you fancy, and you know, gathering all the information and really talking with yourself and doing investigations and reflecting, then maybe come to the conclusion that other things might work better. But you know, you don't have to maybe go directly in the industry you fancy the most, or you think you belong there. You could also do that in a second step, right? Or in a third step. You can switch and first start somewhere else. Those are all opportunities, but I will never ever force people or tell them that's not your industry, so you better look somewhere else. You know, who am I on earth to say that? People really have to find out that themselves. And it's funny to come back also to because we just finished today. Normally we would travel 2 days in the curriculum to another city, to Munich from Berlin, to visit companies, and we planned today and yesterday. That obviously didn't happen. When we were making the schedule the end of last year, we thought, okay, maybe we can.
Surely, by May.
Yes. We had virtual events, 4 company visits, as we call them, over 2 days. And there were alumni also presenting. And the question always came up, you know, what was the most important thing that you remember from the course, which they use? And what you said also, Chris, it was, you know, the group work, you know, working in the teams. But also courses like decision making, negotiation skills, what people really use daily because of the MBA program, running meetings, for example. But yeah, what was mentioned the most was in the interaction with diverse group of people within the organization.
Right. Now, as I look at some of the questions that viewers have been sending in, and Marcel, you had made the comment earlier that 90% of your graduates have found positions in Germany. So this is a question to any of you that want to tackle it. We've seen over the last 3-4 years applicants considering perhaps an MBA in the US, and dissuaded by a fairly heavy-handed rhetoric from the White House about H-1B visas and the ability to then stay in the US. Canada perhaps has been a far more progressive message. Now, visas are beyond the control of the career services team, at least I think so. So to what extent, based on your experience, should it factor into the decision-making of applicants to London Business School, to Alliance Manchester, to EDHEC and to ESMT? Because it's, you know, visa policies also change. I mean, Zoe, it's an open question, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's twofold. I think there's the legal piece, and then there's the fit piece. And I'll take the fit piece first, because that's pretty straightforward. I think we always encourage students to think about where they're going to be successful, both in the recruitment process and in the career. And if you're looking at something like a client-facing industry, when we talk to consulting recruiters, they're often saying, we want to hire people that know how to do business in this market. We want to be confident that we can send this person out to our #1 client and they'll know, you know, just the way to kind of build rapport and set the agenda for a business meeting. And I think students feel I've come to an international business school, I've traveled loads, I'm really, multicultural myself, that shouldn't be a factor, but it is. And I do think cultural fit is something that's important to think about when you're thinking about your post-MBA location. So that's one piece. And then in terms of the legality, I think students should do their research before coming to the MBA, because I think it's about that ROI. Are you going to get the return on investment? So doing some research about how realistic it might be to work in the geography that you're interested in. What I will say specifically from an LBS perspective, and this will be relevant for Manchester as well, is, the graduate visa has now come in, which really has removed barriers for us. That means any student that graduates from our programme is able to stay in the UK for 2 years post-graduation. So for those thinking about the UK, there is a piece about, a UK business school is going to give some ease, I guess, to getting a role in the UK after graduation. But what I would also say, talking to employers, is the key is getting the right talent. And for a lot of our diversified sector employers, so, our FMCG companies, they're often based in, the middle of nowhere in Europe, like these really sort of remote towns that people haven't heard of. And they will sponsor international talent because they want the right people. And I do think that the MBA, it's a pool that people come to because they want the talent that's there, and they will look at sponsorship. So there are always possibilities, but I think the more amount of research you can do before joining a program, the better, just to make sure there are no horrible surprises. But certainly as a gateway to the UK, a UK business school is offering a far easier route than perhaps it has in the past.
Right, and perhaps Chris, any sort of addition on what might be decided in Westminster versus, well, it's all about talent, and then we'll get voices from the EU.
It's very difficult to keep following Zoe because she's very comprehensive in her answer, but she's something else to go with it. I would agree with everything that she said. Not at all. No, I mean, I think we're the graduate route coming into play. I think it's next month or the month after. I mean, I don't think we can underestimate just how important that is. There was a similar process probably 5-6 years ago, something like that, with post-study work visa, and actually the impact of that being taken away probably wasn't as dramatic as we feared it would be. And it slightly contradicts what Zoe's saying, but I think she's absolutely right in terms of consulting. But in certain other spaces, I mean, I remember having a conversation at the time with a bank in London, and it was almost a kind of, they were almost dismissive of it. It was because, well, we're an international bank, we need international people, we will sponsor visas. It's that simple. And so it's completely right about the fit, and it's got to be right on all sides, because the employer is going to an extra cost and extra complication to sponsor that visa. But it didn't. I mean, our program's smaller, admittedly, but it didn't have a massive impact on our students. It made it more time complicated because they had a certain amount of time to find a role on their student visa, whereas the post-study work visa extended it, and the graduate route will do that. And I think the term was used there as a gateway to the UK, and I would completely agree with that. I mean, if you're looking at building a career in the UK, that is going to be much. It's going to be much easier for the next couple of years and more diverse as well, because I think what we'll see is now it'll take some time for the market to understand it, but where things have been closed are startups, scale-ups, SMEs. Opens all of that up for potential careers, and these are the kind of organizations who are not used to being able to access that level of talent.
Right. I mean, Spencer, perspective, because of course you've got a footprint in the UK, multiple campuses across France, and the EU market. Does that sort of make a difference? And Zoe was talking about the importance of research to be perhaps realistic about whether French, Dutch, Spanish, Italian, German job market opportunities.
Yeah, I was reading a jobs report produced by the EU earlier on today, which included a map of Europe, which was very striking because it's the first time I've seen a map of Europe without the UK in it, and it's quite a surprising thing. But I would, there's a particularity about the French labour market which favours internships. And so one of the things that I think is very attractive, certainly for students coming into France, is that although we do a course which is about 10 to 12 months long, the MBAs get an 18-month student visa, which means that if they've got that visa, then they're then able to go off and do an internship with a company in France. It's all part of that same visa. So I think that's something that's very attractive to people who come into France, because it means that potentially they can then move seamlessly into a 6-month internship without having to worry about going through any further paperwork. At the same time, of course, that gives the opportunity, that gives the company an opportunity to look at them an opportunity to look at the company, and so conceivably the possibility to extend beyond that. So I think that's something that's attractive. Going back to the research point, I think that's clearly very important. And it often comes back to the same question, which I provocatively ask, and we talked about a few minutes ago, which is, what is it that's special about you? Because if there is something that's special about you, then a company, I think, will want to go through the paperwork or the hurdles to find a visa. So it's really getting the MBAs to look back in at themselves and understand what it is that they've got to offer that will make a company want to go through the hoops. Okay, rather than take on a Spaniard or a Belgian or a Portuguese. Take me on from outside of the EU, because only I offer this combination of skills or factors. So I think that research, but also knowledge of oneself, is really important.
So perhaps to conclude, and Marcel, please feel free to also weigh in on the buoyant German market, but just to finish from each of you, Zoe goes last, Chris, so she won't be able to take your story. Just perhaps one story, as you reflect on the last few years, all of the work that you have done with such a diverse mix of students, one story that you think is special to you or somehow captures the transformation that you see in your students. Marcel, starting with you.
Oh dear. No, there is there is quite a recent story with a student from, I have to be a little bit careful because I don't want to reveal personalities. No, a student from Lebanon in the pandemic with this bloody explosion last year, stuck in that country, working online, because he went back after a couple of weeks in the program from Berlin back home to whatever, doesn't matter, and couldn't come back anymore. And this whole circumstances, it's so hard to imagine yourself in the shoes of this person. What on earth are you doing? You're studying an MBA, you don't see your classmates, you're stuck in, he was literally stuck in the country because he couldn't leave. Then relatives, affected by this bloody explosion. And I got an app today from him, last round in Berlin, very close to a job, which is totally new, changing everything, industry, the role, the location. So I'm, and those stories, I'm not taking the credit for anything, but it's working. And those, I think then the whole investment under all those difficult circumstances, it's totally worth it. So
it's a wonderful example of the resilience that I guess we were describing. Now, Chris, you can't take any credit for Pep Guardiola, but do you have a...
That's completely the wrong colour from my point of view, I'm sorry to say that. And
we'll see if Ollie's the man for us. But
I'm going to tell you that 10 years ago, nobody ever mentioned that particular football team in Manchester.
The noisy neighbours.
Depressing, indeed. And Marcel, you need to let us know how that finishes up that story, because if the individuals at last stage, I think we're all now hoping for the best for them. So, okay, this is a little bit touchy-feely, so my apologies. But there is probably a perception a little bit that, you know, go to business school, it's super competitive. There's classmates and they're collegiate and everything, but you're all competing for the same jobs and for the same opportunities. So I just wanted to share that I spoke to, last April, I think it was, I spoke to our current class president, who immediately, all of her concerns were about the class who were looking for an intern, the class who just graduated and looking for full-time jobs, and was really worried about how those guys were going to get on and how we were supporting them, etc. And I spoke to the kind of incoming class, or the outgoing class president, I should say, whose whole focus was, how is the other class getting on with internships? How are they feeling about missing out on campus experience, and how are they all getting on? So you've got this potentially super competitive environment where, as I said before, everybody's smart, everybody's capable, and everybody wants those jobs, those networking opportunities. And yet there is something about coming together on an MBA that builds that sense of collegiality and support for one another, and a real sense of community that other people on the conversation have alluded to. That if you nurture that and you develop it and you work on it through your career, will be there with you for the rest of your professional and personal life. And I do emphasize the personal life. And I've said to people, we as a team and colleagues that I've worked with, you know, we know people in all corners of the world, and one point when we retire, I'm sure we're all going on a world trip where we'll only have to pay for flights, because we know so many people. And that's I suppose the one takeaway from the past year. Despite the circumstances, despite everything that was going on, I had two class presidents who were more concerned about how other people were getting on than they were about themselves.
Yeah, well, we love the touchy-feely stories. Zoe talked about a network for life, and you know, the set of the bonds that creates. Zoe, has Chris taken your story?
No, I mean, I think mine is possibly sounds less positive, I think, on the surface. I think what's interesting to me is the amount of students that will come in with a very set plan. And I was working with a student who was convinced, you know, they wanted to be a banker. That had been their dream. They hadn't made it when they were in undergrad, so they kind of went off and did something else and were like, right, I'll do the MBA and I'll make it this time. And I think there was, you know, I think Spencer mentioned family pressure. I think it was like this hereditary thing that they were going to become a banker. And they were very successful in getting their banking internship. And they absolutely hated every cell of it, and came back sort of a bit like, oh my goodness, like, I don't really know what to do. Like, the thing I thought I wanted to do, I've absolutely loathed. And not only did I loathe it, but I also wasn't very good at it, because I find sometimes the things tend to go hand in hand. And so we were talking through, you know, well, stay focused, let's stay active. And so he ended up getting this kind of project with this small health tech startup, because they needed a finance expert to kind of help them. They had no idea what they were doing. So he went off to do that, to kind of get some skills, do something new, kind of keep his spirits up, really, I think. And that 3-week project made him realize, actually, this is what I want to do. And so he is now working with that health tech startup. And on paper, if you look at the salary, if you look at the kind of aims delivered, perhaps it doesn't kind of reach that. But in terms of him actually having found a career he would never have found, that I know is going to make him very happy, I think the MBA gave him that opportunity to find it. Because if he'd gone into banking straight away from, you know, his undergrad, or straight after the MBA without having done the internship, he would be deeply unhappy. And I think it is that opportunity to fail, and find something else. So to me, although it sort of doesn't sound so great, I think it actually is a really great success story and a really good example of how an MBA can transform. So yeah, there you go.
Well, I've said, unfortunately, we're at time, and Spencer, I hope that you can share your story with those that will be joining you in the subsequent discussion.
Yeah, Zoe stole it.
Every time I have these panels, just to your point, I think that you are the hidden gems of your programs, and what you infuse, the journey that you help these people to just, you know, the opportunities that they create. And so whether it's testament to a resilient young man and family in the Lebanon, or, you know, all of those stories of how people pivot with the sort of positivity that I think that you impart to them of you know, making things possible. You've done it again for the last 60 minutes, and I defy anyone that watched this not to want to find out more about each of your wonderful institutions. So Zoe, Spencer, Marcel, and Chris, thank you for the last hour that you've spent with us at the CentreCourt Festival. It was a real pleasure. Thank you very much.